In just 95 days, Otho rose from Nero's notorious companion to Roman emperor, only to make a shocking decision that ended his own life and a brutal civil war. This is the untold story of Rome's most fleeting ruler. You're about to discover the man behind the myth, not just the opulent playboy, but the ambitious general who seized power in the chaotic year of the four emperors. What kind of leader emerges when the Roman world is tearing itself apart? And what extraordinary circumstances lead an emperor to sacrifice his own life for the good of the empire? Drawing from Suetonius's Lives of the 12 Caesars, we'll expose the high-stakes betrayals, the desperate battles, and the profound personal dilemmas that defined Otho's incredibly brief, yet pivotal reign. We're cutting through centuries of legend to bring you the raw, unfiltered truth of imperial power at its most volatile. If you're ready to unravel one of ancient Rome's most compelling mysteries, hit that like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe so you don't miss our next deep dive into history. A. Salvius Otho. The ancestors of Otho hailed from the ancient and honorable town of Ferentum, a prominent family in Etruria. His grandfather, Marcus Salvius Otho, whose father was a Roman knight, but whose mother was of humble origin, became a senator through the favor of Livia Augusta, in whose household he was educated. However, he never advanced beyond the rank of praetor. His father, Lucius Otho, was nobly descended on his mother's side, allied with several great families. He was so beloved by Tiberius and resembled him so closely in appearance that many believed Tiberius was his father. Lucius Otho maintained strictness and severity not only in his civic duties but also as proconsul of Africa and in various extraordinary military commands. He even had the courage to punish with death soldiers in Illyricum. These soldiers, during a disturbance attempted by Camillus, had turned on their generals, killing them as promoters of an insurrection against Claudius. He ordered their execution at the front of the camp, under his own eyes, despite knowing that Claudius had rewarded these very soldiers with higher ranks for their actions. This act brought him fame but diminished his standing at court. However, he soon regained favor by revealing to Claudius a plot against his life, conceived by a Roman knight and learned from some of his slaves. For this, the Senate ordered a statue of Lucius Otho to be erected in the palace, an honor rarely bestowed. Claudius also elevated him to patrician dignity, praising him highly and concluding, "A man than whom I don't even wish to have children who would be better." Lucius Otho had 2 sons with the noblewoman Albia Terentia, Lucius Titianus, and a younger son named Marcus, who shared his own cognomen. He also had a daughter, whom he betrothed to Drusus, Germanicus's son, before she was of marriageable age. Emperor Otho was born on April 28, during the consulship of Camillus Aruntius and Domitius Aenobarbus. From his earliest youth, he was riotous and wild, often severely disciplined by his father. It was said he would roam at night, seizing anyone he met who was drunk or too weak to resist, and tossing them in a blanket. After his father's death, to better curry favor with a powerful freedwoman at the palace, he pretended to be in love with her, even though she was old and nearly decrepit. Through her, he gained access to Nero's inner circle, quickly becoming a principal favorite due to their similar dispositions, or as some say, through mutual acts of depravity. His influence at court was so great that when a man of consular rank was condemned for bribery, Otho, having been bribed himself for a large sum to secure a pardon, boldly brought him into the Senate to offer his thanks, before the pardon was even fully secured. Having, through the freedwoman, gained access to all the emperor's secrets, Otho hosted a lavish feast for Nero and his mother on the day planned for her murder, to avert suspicion. Poppaea Sabina, whom Nero passionately desired and had taken from her husband, was entrusted to Otho, who formally married her. However, Otho was not content with merely having her favors. He loved her so extravagantly that he could not tolerate Nero as his rival. It is widely believed that Otho not only refused entry to those sent by Nero to fetch her, but on one occasion even locked Nero out, leaving him standing at the door, fruitlessly mixing prayers and threats, demanding the return of what he had entrusted. Consequently, his so-called marriage was dissolved, and he was sent as lieutenant to Lusitania. This punishment was considered sufficiently severe because harsher proceedings might have exposed the entire charade, which, despite all efforts, eventually became public in a revealing distich. You ask why Otho's banished? No, the cause comes not within the verge of vulgar laws. Against all rules of fashionable life, the rogue had dared to sleep with his own wife. He governed the province as quaestor for 10 years with remarkable moderation and justice. As soon as an opportunity for revenge arose, Otho readily joined Galba's cause, simultaneously harboring hopes of seizing the imperial dignity for himself. The state of the times greatly encouraged him, but even more so were the assurances from Seleucus, the astrologer. Seleucus, who had previously predicted Otho would outlive Nero, unexpectedly reappeared, promising him he would succeed to the empire very soon. Therefore, Otho seized every opportunity to cultivate favor with those around him through all manner of civilities. Whenever he hosted Galba for supper, he distributed a gold piece to every man of the cohort on guard duty, and sought to oblige other soldiers in various ways. When chosen as an arbitrator in a land dispute, he bought the land and gave it to one of the parties. Soon, nearly everyone thought and said he was the only man worthy of succeeding to the empire. Otho hoped for adoption by Galba and expected it daily. But finding himself disappointed, with Piso being preferred, he turned his thoughts to achieving his goal through violence. He was spurred on by his immense debts and his resentment at Galba's actions. He openly declared that he could not survive unless he became emperor, and that it mattered little whether he fell by the hands of enemies in battle or by creditors in the forum. A few days earlier, he had extracted 1,000,000 sesterces from one of the emperor's slaves for securing him a stewardship. This was his entire fund for such a grand enterprise. Initially, the plot was entrusted to only 5 members of the guard, then to 10 others, each of the original 5 recruiting 2. Each conspirator received 10,000 sesterces up front, with a promise of 50,000 more. Through these, others were drawn in, though not many, confident that when the crisis came, they would have sufficient support. Otho's initial plan was, immediately after Piso's departure, to seize the camp and attack Galba while he was dining in the palace. However, he was restrained by concern for the cohort then on duty, fearing he would bring too much discredit upon them. This was because the same cohort had been on guard when Caius was slain and when Nero deserted. For a time afterward, he was also restrained by omens and Seleucus's advice. On the day finally set for the enterprise, Otho notified his accomplices to await him in the forum near the Temple of Saturn, at the Gilded Milestone. He went in the morning to pay his respects to Galba and, receiving the customary kiss, attended the sacrifice and heard the augur's predictions. His freedmen then brought word that the architects had arrived, the agreed-upon signal. Otho withdrew, pretending he was going to view a house for sale, and exited through a back door of the palace to the designated meeting place. Some say he feigned a vague fit, ordering those around him to use that excuse if he was sought. Quickly concealed in a woman's litter, he hastened toward the camp. But as the bearers tired, he got out and began to run. His shoe came loose, causing him to stop, but his attendants immediately lifted him onto their shoulders. Unanimously saluted as emperor, he arrived amidst auspicious acclamations and drew swords into the Principia in the camp. All who met him joined the cavalcade, as if privy to the plot. Thereupon, sending soldiers to dispatch Galba and Piso, he addressed the soldiery with only these words to secure their affections: "I shall be content with whatever you think fit to leave me." Toward the end of the day, Otho entered the Senate. After a short speech, in which he falsely claimed he had been seized in the streets and compelled by violence to assume imperial authority, which he intended to exercise in conjunction with them, he retired to the palace. Among other compliments he received from the throngs congratulating and flattering him, he was called Nero by the mob and showed no intention of declining that cognomen. Indeed, some authors state that he used it in his official acts and in his first letters to provincial governors. He allowed all of Nero's images and statues to be replaced and restored his procurators and freedmen to their former posts. The first document he signed as emperor was a promise of 50 million sesterces to complete the Golden House. That night, he is said to have been greatly frightened in his sleep, groaning heavily. Found lying on the floor before his bed by those who rushed in, he tried every kind of atonement to appease Galba's ghost, which he felt had violently thrown him from his bed. The next day, as he was taking omens, a great storm arose, and he suffered a grievous fall, muttering to himself from time to time, "What business have I the loud trumpets to sound?" About the same time, the armies in Germany swore allegiance to Vitellius as emperor. Upon receiving this intelligence, Otho advised the Senate to send deputies to inform them that a prince had already been chosen and to persuade them to peace and understanding. Through letters and messages, however, he offered Vitellius a partnership in the empire and his daughter's hand in marriage. But with war now unavoidable and Vitellius's generals and troops advancing, Otho received a perilous demonstration of the Praetorian Guard's attachment and loyalty to him. It had been deemed necessary to issue some weapons from the stores and transport them to the fleet by marine troops. While these troops were fetching the arms from the camp at night, some of the guards, suspecting treachery, incited a riot. Suddenly, the entire body, without any officers leading them, ran to the palace, demanding that the entire Senate be put to the sword. Having repulsed some tribunes who tried to stop them and slain others, they burst bloodied into the banquet hall, inquiring for the emperor. They would not leave until they had seen him. Otho now embarked on his expedition against Vitellius with great eagerness but too much haste, disregarding the ominous circumstances attending it. For the Ancilia, sacred shields had been taken from the Temple of Mars for the usual procession but had not yet been replaced. During this interval, it had long been considered very unfortunate to undertake any enterprise. He also set forth on the day when the worshippers of the Mother of the Gods began their lamentations and wailing. Besides these, other unlucky omens attended him. In a victim offered to Father Dis, he found signs that are usually favorable, but in that specific sacrifice, the opposite indications are deemed most propitious. At his first departure, he was halted by Tiber floods, and 20 miles from the city, found the road blocked by fallen houses. Although the general opinion was that it would be wise to prolong the war, as the enemy suffered from famine and cramped quarters, Otho, with equal rashness, resolved to force them into engagement as soon as possible. This might have been from impatience of prolonged anxiety, hoping to conclude matters before Vitellius's arrival, or because he could not resist the troops' ardor, who were all clamoring for battle. However, he was not present at any of the ensuing battles, staying instead at Brixellum. He had the advantage in 3 minor engagements near the Alps, around Placentia, and a place called Castors. But he was defeated by a deceitful enemy stratagem in the last and greatest battle at Bedriacum. Hopes of a conference were offered, and soldiers were drawn up to hear peace terms declared, when unexpectedly and amidst their mutual salutations, they were forced to take up arms. Immediately after this, Otho decided to end his life. Many believe, not without reason, that this was more out of shame for prolonging a struggle for the empire at the hazard of public interest and so many lives, rather than from despair or distrust of his troops. For he still had reserves in full force, whom he had kept for a second attempt at fortune, and others were arriving from Dalmatia, Pannonia, and Moesia. Even the recently defeated troops were not so disheartened as to be unwilling to risk everything to wipe away their recent disgrace. My father, Suetonius Lenus, was in this battle, at that time an Angusticlavian tribune in the 13th Legion. He often recounted that Otho, before becoming emperor, so abhorred civil war that once, upon hearing an account of Cassius and Brutus's deaths at table, he trembled. My father also said Otho would never have interfered with Galba had he not been confident of succeeding without a war. Furthermore, Otho was then encouraged to despise life by the example of a common soldier. This soldier brought news of the army's defeat, and finding himself disbelieved and ridiculed as a liar and coward for supposedly fleeing the battlefield, he fell upon his sword at the emperor's feet. My father said that upon seeing this, Otho cried out that he would expose to no further danger such brave men, who had deserved so well at his hands. Advising his brother, his nephew, and the rest of his friends to secure their safety as best they could, he embraced and kissed them, then sent them away. Withdrawing into a private room, he wrote a 2-page letter of consolation to his sister. He also sent another to Messalina, Nero's widow, whom he had intended to marry, entrusting her with the care of his relics and memory. He then burned all the letters he possessed to prevent danger and mischief to the writers from the conqueror. What ready money he had, he distributed among his household. Now prepared to end his life, he was induced to suspend his purpose by a great tumult that had broken out in the camp. Finding that some soldiers who were trying to escape had been seized and detained as deserters, he said, "Let us add this night to our life." These were his very words. He then gave orders that no one should be harmed. Keeping his chamber door open until late at night, he allowed anyone who wished to come and see him. Finally, after quenching his thirst with a draught of cold water, he took up 2 daggers, examined both points, placed one under his pillow, and shutting his chamber door, slept very soundly. Awakening about daybreak, he stabbed himself under his left breast. Some people burst into the room upon his first groan. He alternately covered and exposed his wound to the bystanders' view, and thus life soon ebbed away. His funeral was hastily performed, according to his own orders, in the 38th year of his age and the 95th day of his reign. Otho's physical appearance did not match the great spirit he displayed on this occasion. He is said to have been of low stature, splay-footed, and bandy-legged. However, he was effeminately meticulous in his personal care. He plucked out his body hair by the roots, and being somewhat bald, he wore a wig so perfectly fitted that no one would have known it was one. He shaved every day and rubbed his face with soaked bread, a practice he began when the first down appeared on his chin, to prevent growing a beard. It is also said that he publicly celebrated the sacred rites of Isis, clad in a linen garment, as used by worshippers of that goddess. These circumstances, I imagine, caused the world to wonder all the more that his death was so out of character with his life. Many soldiers present, kissing and tearfully moistening his hands and feet as he lay dead, and celebrating him as a most gallant man and an incomparable emperor, immediately ended their own lives on the spot, not far from his funeral pyre. Many of those at a distance, upon hearing the news of his death, in the anguish of their hearts, began fighting among themselves until they dispatched one another. In conclusion, the generality of mankind, though they hated him while living, highly extolled him after his death. It was commonly said and believed that Galba had been driven to destruction by his rival, not so much for Otho to reign himself, but to restore Rome to its ancient liberty. It is remarkable in this emperor's fortune that he owed both his rise and fall to the intractable difficulties in which he was entangled, first financially and then politically. As far as we know, he was not a follower of any philosophical sect that justified, or even recommended, suicide in particular cases. Yet he perpetrated that act with extraordinary coolness and resolution. What is no less remarkable, he did so, as he avowed, solely from a motive of public expediency. For many years after his death, it was observed of him that none ever died like Otho.